In the heart of Middle America, the sun bakes the earth until it cracks, and the air hums with a heat older than the soil itself. Out here, the land remembers every whisper, every secret, every sin buried just beneath the surface. People build their lives on the soil, plant their dreams in it, and pray the past won't come clawing its way back up through the dirt. But sometimes it does. And when it does, it isn't quiet. It's a scream that splits the night wide open, a reminder that paradise and perdition often share the same address. Welcome to the American heartland, where what we want most can cost us everything.
Late 1980s, rural Missouri. They looked like a sweet old couple. Quiet, a little strange. Ray in overalls, Faye keeping the house, but something rotten was festering. Together they hunted the forgotten. Drifters, hitchhikers, men chasing a job, a meal, or someone who might care if they disappeared. Their bodies vanished beneath the cow manure, silence, and years of practiced Midwestern niceness. Faye kept the books. Ray pulled the trigger. A murder operation disguised as hard work. She swore she didn't know, but she always knew.
Sometimes the real horror ages in silence.
Welcome to the Fear Archive, where we dig up the real-life horror hiding underneath your favorite films. I'm Amanda, your guide into the dark.
I am Michael Ryan Asa. 3 names, just like the ones that stick in the case files. Your resident historian of the macabre and human trivia black hole.
Quick heads up, this story has real violence and disturbing true crime, but we tell it with care and never blame the victims.
Think of it like a haunted house. You could step out any time, but let's be honest, you're way too curious not to peek beyond the next door. And we're not just making this up. Everything comes from credible sources, and you can check it out for yourself. So today's source is Tom Miller's pulpy but surprisingly sharp 93 book, The Copeland Killings. This was the kind of thing that you'd find at the supermarket registers in the 90s.
Tonight, the Copeland murders and how their shadow might stretch into X, Ty West's 1970s grindhouse slasher with heart and a hatchet.
Yeah, because the scariest villains don't always need a mask, and sometimes Pearl doesn't need makeup.
And speaking of X, we've got a guest who knows that film better than anyone.
Yeah, he's produced X, Pearl, Maxine, The House of the Devil, and The Innkeepers, and many more. So basically, if it's a horror film with style, he's had a hand in it.
A behind-the-scenes legend, a tastemaker in modern horror.
And the kind of guy who probably knows how long it takes to bury a body strictly for budgetary reasons.
Please welcome to the Fear Archive, Peter Polk.
Hello.
Hey, Peter.
Hey, Michael. Hi, Amanda.
So good to have you. So excited to talk about all things true crime and X. Big fans.
Yeah, and our first story, it is we are going back to the farm here. Instead of Old MacDonald, we got Old Man Copeland, and he had a farm, and he did some harm. So let's get right to it, shall we?
Yeah, let's get Peter familiar with the crime.
All right, so we got to go all the way back to 1914, Oklahoma. All right, Ray Copeland had a hard childhood. This is Depression-era instability. Started stealing livestock at a very early age. Actually, the first thing he stole 2 hogs from his father. Started forging checks at a young age. Prison followed. This was something that would be back and forth throughout Ray's entire life, in and out of jail and prison.
Yeah, in 1940, Ray met Faye Wilson at a doctor's office. I bet she wished she canceled that appointment that day. They married quickly, had multiple children, and from the outside, they lived like any typical farm couple. But Ray's criminal past never stopped in the present time. He continued to commit crimes, and they moved around a lot. They were in California, Illinois, Missouri, and he was in and out of jail this whole time. So every time he'd go into jail,
he had learned something new. This guy, it was like college for criminals. I mean, Ray really really got this guy had a doctorate in how to scam people. And where we basically ended up was something that worked for him, for Ray Copeland, was learning how to scam the cattle auctions that were held throughout the Midwest. So, hey, Peter, do you know what a cattle auction is?
I don't. I'm not familiar with the term.
Or it's basically this is a livestock auction. I think. I don't think it was cattle. I think it was more than cattle. It was cattle and hogs. So essentially, you'd get the livestock presented in front of a audience of hungry farmers who would bid and try to get the pig or cow or, I don't know, collection of chickens for the lowest possible price. This was a thing with Ray where he would write fraudulent checks to close the deal on this all. Eventually people caught on, right? Like eventually people caught on and knew this guy was writing bad checks. So he was actually banned from these auctions.
Which is where things start ramping up in the 1980s. So let's jump to the 1980s. They have an established family. They've been moving around. He's banned from these cattle auctions. So what does he have to do?
I'll tell you what. Yeah.
You tell me. Go ahead, Mike.
I'll tell you. He gets himself some drifters. So how does one get themselves some drifters? I don't know.
Might know.
Maybe put up an ad.
He and his wife go about this in the creepiest way. Everyone, they go about this in the creepiest way. So they actually kind of already know they have ill intentions with all of this. So they leave town. They actually head up to Illinois and they canvass homeless shelters. And what they do is they sign up a guy to work on the farm. They look for people who really didn't have a lot of ties to anyone or anything. And they tried to find people who had limited involvement with family and friends. They would bring them back to their farm in what was this county, Amanda? I don't even remember the county. The county here.
It's in Missouri. They're in Missouri.
In Missouri. Yes. Well, they would bring them back to their county and they would have them open a P.O. box and a checking account. And then they would give them the prompts to go to the cattle auctions to bid on. I got to backtrack myself. I got to stop saying cattle auctions, the livestock auctions, right? They'd have them bid on cattle and they'd win the bids and they'd write these checks that Ray would immediately force them to bounce. So they're bouncing bad checks, but they already have the cows.
Essentially, they're flipping cattle, which is crazy, right? Like it's a house. They're taking these cows and pigs and they are flipping it like a house. Again, this is the 1980s, so checks were normal and check bouncing was a real thing.
There's a cow tipping joke in there somewhere.
There definitely is for all our younger viewers and listeners.
Basically, what that means is you tip a cow over and it can't get back up on its own. We do not condone cow tipping, okay? Ray would probably get incredibly pissed if people cow tip too. He's like, that's my fucking money! This didn't last very long, all right? Here's the thing about Ray and Faye Copeland. Faye, as we said in the beginning, Faye kept the house. She kept the kids. She kept the farm. Ray was the breadwinner, right? He didn't work a day in his life. Everything that Ray did, every bit of money that came into the family was related to some type of scam. Now, in the 80s, the Copelands were faced with the chance of complete bankruptcy, losing everything. So there will come in a point where we're like, well, was it the desperation of losing everything that led Ray to murder? But here we get with the gory stuff, right? There are about 5 killings that we can connect to the Copelands, okay? And essentially what would happen would be Ray would pull in these drifters, and the first came from a homeless shelter in Illinois. And what Ray did was after he acquired that cattle and the check was bounced, he walked that person out into the field and shot him in the back of the head with a .22 Marlin.
In fact, all of the men were shot in the back of the head with the same .22.
.22 Marlin. That might actually ring a bell with our true crime aficionados out there. Same rifle used by Ronald DeFeo in the Amityville Horror murders. I guess that was a popular true crime weapon in the 70s and 80s. I'm not entirely sure.
The Copelands would bury all of these victims on their property. They had a huge piece of property and they would put them in the ground and then put bales of hay on top of them. I believe one was near the swamp area. But I think my favorite part about the story is how Faye claims she had nothing to do with it. And yet she kept a handwritten list with all the victims' names marked on the list with an X. So there was a list of names and all the folks that were taken X next to their name, which I love as a wraparound to the movie.
Yeah. They were sleeping with the fishes, see? Oh. Hey, did you hear that she allegedly, and this is true, she allegedly made a quilt out of all of their clothing scraps?
That's creepy.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Ugh.
You think she slept with it?
Yes.
Faye also says that she was a battered woman, but it writes itself as that she's an accomplice. I don't know, Peter. What do you think? She claims that, Ray was violent and abusive, and the kids say that too. But she's here keeping a list, checking it twice, putting an X when they're naughty or nice.
Well, I think you have to kind of go back to that time period and really put yourself there. It's Missouri, I believe you said, that they live in. So this is the South. I think there's some traditional roles that, the husband and wife kind of, fall into. So someone like Faye, may not be so quick to be, outspoken. And so maybe she has to get her sort of opinions out in a different way. But I don't know. This is I'm not a true crime expert by any means. And so this is all new to me. And it's very interesting as I'm hearing about it to see how there's immediate corollaries to X and certainly don't recall Ty ever talking about the Copeland, I guess, serial killer.
Yeah.
The thing with this couple, too, is they were the oldest couple to ever be on death row.
Going to that point, they did get caught, obviously. And the way they got caught is one of them got away. One of the victims got away.
That is how the craziest cases get cracked. Whether it's Jeffrey Dahmer's final victim, who ended up, unfortunately and very sadly, getting walked back to him by the police, or Bob Berdella, who, Amanda, or Peter, have you ever heard of Bob Berdella?
No, you got to tell me.
Oh, man. Bob Berdella had a booth at a flea market where he sold, glass eyes and taxidermy things. I think they call them like Jenny Hannovers, where they're like pieces of like a monkey and a fish, and it's a monkey fish. Anyway, this guy had a bunch of crazy shit that he'd sell at a flea market, but he also was kidnapping men and torturing them in his attic, and one of them got out in a dog collar and was running around. This is also in Missouri in the 80s. So for a second, they thought there was a connection between Bob Berdella and this guy. And, this couple, Faye and Ray. And Faye and Ray actually got caught because their survivor, this man named Jack McCormick, I believe they picked him up in one of the homeless shelters in Illinois. They brought him back and he escaped because I believe there was an issue with, like, Ray just couldn't shoot him. Like, there was a mechanical issue with the gun. So he escaped and ran to town. And he tipped off the police, and that tipped off a whole big search of their farm and the surrounding area.
The police found 5 bodies, the murder weapon, and the ledger. Mm-hmm. They speculated there could be 8 victims total. Thinking about this, I don't know if this is just what they found. Since in the bigger sense, Ray and Faye they were their own drifters in a sense. If they moved around from state to state, who knows what they were doing in California, in Illinois? They could have been killing for a long time, and there might be a lot more victims out there.
So I got a big question that like the whole time I was reading this book and reading up on this case, like why didn't anyone suspect this quiet elderly couple sooner? I mean, they're human beings, right? Like we're all capable of violence and terrible things, right? So like why?
Well, I think you don't suspect that an elderly couple is going to be, hiding such violent like secrets, like you just, I mean, I think, and that's, if we want to loop back to sort of X, I mean, I think that's the last thing that these young people, think about when they're coming to this farmhouse yeah, I mean, I think it's I think you're giving everybody the benefit of the doubt. I mean, I think times have changed and now we're in 2025 and there's much, much less trust of one another. But I think in that time, surprisingly enough, I mean, I think everybody would just, went around just assuming the best of people.
Yeah, that analog era of innocence, that people, I know it's a big topic where people are like, well, why were there so many serial killers in the 70s and 80s and now we don't have them? And I think that can build onto that too. Like there's that aspect of we're just a little more zoned in on people too. I mean, I guess plus the technology, right?
I mean, I have a theory that, I mean, I think, I think just to reference what you're saying about serial killers, I think they've always existed. I think back then we probably didn't have the resources we have now to kind of like track down. So I think serial killers of now still exist. There's just more, I think, careful. I mean, I recall a great series a good friend and colleague of mine, Josh Zeman, did called The Killing Season that tracked along serial killer. And I think he had talked a lot about making that series and tracking it down. And I think one of the interesting things in that series he did was that there was a lot of internet sleuthing that went around to try to track down these this open case, cold case. And one of the statistics that had come out of it, I mean, this is a series of murders that happen along the Gilgo Beach. Well, the bodies were found there, and we just didn't know as a dumping ground. But this is pre 9/11, and at the time, I think there's reportedly something like almost like 200 active serial killers at any given point. And then I think post 9/11, I think a lot of attention went to, sort of like the terrorism, anti-terrorism. And so I think less attention towards, active serial killers. But yeah, I mean, I think that's why shows sort of like Dexter is continuing to capture, I think, the zeitgeist of what it's like to think like a serial killer.
Yeah.
And it's always scarier when you have a duo, whether, it's Faye and Ray or the Hillside Stranglers or Otis and what was his name? Henry Lee Lucas. Like two people who are willing to do that, or a person and a person willing to be complicit with that, are really, really terrifying concepts to think about. And I'm sure there are many situations like that right now going on. But they're, like you were saying, Peter, they're just more careful, and that's terrifying.
I mean, the trust has to be there, I think, for two people to kind of work together. And so what stronger bonds of trust is there between husband and wife?
Exactly.
I agree. And I think it's an interesting juxtaposition on their age paired with being an elderly couple. You look at someone who's in their 60s, 70s, and I could take them out. It's kind of, not to be grim, but when you look at someone who's older, you're like, oh well, I'm younger, I'm stronger. But if you go into their space, their home turf, and they have this all premeditated and planned out, you do not stand a chance. Do you guys believe that age affects how we judge criminal responsibility?
Well, yeah, I think, older criminals or I think, despite heinous crimes, I think their punishments are sometimes reduced in the sense that they aren't likely to be able to serve out that full duration of their punishment. But, whether that's fair or not, I mean, it's just sort of like, it's just reality.
Considering they were or are the oldest folks to be on death row, Ray did die in prison, and Faye's death sentence was commuted due to her age. She was paroled for medical reasons, and she died in 2023. Nope, sorry, 2003.
Yeah, that sounds
They're
more accurate.
skeletons. Wow, that is... Yeah, that's wild. Yeah, I think age does affect how we judge criminal responsibility. I can't say I'm surprised that the sentences Faye's sentence was commuted, and that, Ray's clock just stopped ticking, I want to throw this up there. I do not support the death penalty. I believe that it is a far greater punishment for a murderer or someone who has committed such a horrendous crime to spend the rest of their lives behind bars. Now, what are those horrendous crimes? Obviously, murder, right? These were innocent people who were taken out of existence, right? But I think that no matter what, they both got life sentences, right? I mean, it wasn't like, when Faye's sentence was commuted that she was, running out to have fun afterwards. I mean, you're also still a convicted, serial murderer.
Well, let's jump over to X. X gives us an elderly couple on a farm, Pearl and Howard. But here's the flip. Howard loves Pearl, protects her, even when she's dangerous. So let's talk about the film.
I love this film. All right. So it's set in 1979 in rural Texas. A group of young filmmakers, they rent a guest house on a remote farm to shoot a porno. And the elderly couple who owns the farm, Pearl and Howard, they grow increasingly hostile. Pearl, she's envious and sexually repressed. She begins a violent killing spree against her guests. And as these murders unfold one by one, often in very intimate or voyeuristic settings, we get a bevy of really great themes. We look at aging, sexual repression, visibility and invisibility of older people, rural isolation, the tension between purity and desire. There's so much good stuff to unpack in this film. And it is scary, it is effective, and it hits to the core, where it's also just not a film that just has to be overly complex. It works, and it is just terrifying.
Yeah. Knowing the film so intimately, do you see any connections between the Copelands and the elderly couple from X, Peter?
Well, now that we are talking about it, I wasn't really familiar with the Copelands, and I don't really, as I said before, recall Ty talking about it. And it's very possible he's very knowledgeable. So, but I can see the similarities. I mean, it is interesting. I mean, it's, we have, two older, farm people who, certainly taking their aggression out on strangers that come to the farm just for basically a place to stay. While obviously they have their own agenda, but I mean, it's Texas, and I think if we know about Texas, I think what would it say? You don't mess with Texas.
Yeah,
it's true. You don't mess with Texas. And Pearl and Howard definitely showed that to all their victims in the film. I think one other thing I really love is just elderly predators and being hidden in plain sight. It's such a interesting way to look at these violent criminals. And in X, we really get a way to look into their lives from that lens.
Yeah, I mean, there's something just so terrifying about the fact that, your neighbors in this case, right, could have, half a dozen people buried under their barn. I mean, that is terrifying. Just blink these people out of existence.
Yeah. A question I want to ask is, how do you all feel that rural isolation plays into unchecked violence? Do you think there are a lot of crimes going on in rural settings just because it is so vast? I truly feel that the United States is a different landscape than a lot of places. We have so much farmland. We have so much open space. It's always much larger than folks actually understand it is, unless you actually have taken a road trip across the country. So what do you all think about rural isolation and with killings? Do you think there's a lot more going on than we imagine?
That's an interesting question. Does like a rural landscape lead to more, I guess, like, heinous and crime? Is that what you're getting at? It's like, that we know of, right? Because it's like, it's only a crime if you're caught.
True. Facts. I agree with what Peter said. And, I think that could connect to, the suburbs too, though. I mean, I feel like, to harken back to the hiding in plain sight. I mean, whether you're in the rural farmlands of America's heartland or, the sandy beaches of Fire Island with the Gilgo Beach Killer, right? Like, if you don't get caught, you don't get caught. I personally feel like horror movies have groomed us to be afraid of the isolation. And isolation is really scary. It can be really scary. But my take on that question is, I think it helped.
Yeah. One of my favorite parts of the correlation between X and the Copeland killings, it's got to be that list, y'all. I keep going back to that list. X marks the spot. It really did. I gasped when I read that part. Like, jaw on the floor, rolling down the block. That is such a crazy comparison. Ty didn't know about this true crime, then I want to know his reaction if he finds out now. What about this list? I mean, we did learn that Ray was illiterate. Is that correct, Mike?
Yeah. He was functionally illiterate, and he made it work.
Yeah, he definitely had his wife there to capture everything as a secretary of sorts.
Yeah, and that I agree with that ledger. That ledger is also really creepy because I mean I'm no lawyer. But that ledger, wouldn't that show what they call intent, right? Like it shows that she's aware they're dead, and I think that it also listed the guys that just left.
Yeah, but I think that ledger is the only reason she probably got sentenced as well. That was the evidence. Yeah,
It shows you're dead.
There are actual images of the ledger. And just for everyone who's listening, the X was very large. It was very much giving the film when you see it.
What about the fact that, all right, there might have been some sort of Stockholm syndrome going on here where, I was almost calling her Pearl. Was Faye a victim in this all? Was Faye was Faye the sixth victim?
But I think going to what you're saying, was Pearl a victim?
Well, I think, the beauty of the X is that it turned into a trilogy. And so we get a little bit more backstory into Pearl's upbringing. And I think, and I don't know if is she a victim? I mean, of her circumstances, I think it's, nature versus nurture in this situation. She's raised, from a very strict German mother, repressing a lot of how she's feeling and what she's going through. And I think that certainly, and then having the sort of committed, the commitment in Howard to do all in his power to support her, as we, kind of meet him at the end of Pearl. And obviously, that's as a young man, and we, get to meet his devotion at the end of Pearl. And then you're obviously seeing, what a lifetime together has sort of, their relations evolved. He's very protective of her, asks these outsiders to stay away in X. And, I think that's, it's, traditional, sort of, I guess, like male leaning role in certainly of that nuclear couple sort of dynamic, certainly of this time period.
Yeah, no, 100%. I hear that, and it's so interesting too because they're like the exact mirror. They're the flip side of each other, right? Like in X and in Pearl, Howard and Pearl, their dynamic is the exact flip side of Faye and Ray Copeland. Like in the Copeland murders, Faye was the one devoted to Ray, and yeah, in Pearl and X, you have Howard just really trying to make the best of the situation and steer them away.
I think looking at the film, I agree. The relationship between the husband and wife was definitely different. But I can't help but think, just even with my own relationship with my husband, if he was committing crimes and getting locked up and we were together and committed to each other with children and bouncing around from state to state, I would know what was going on. There's no way I would be so ignorant to not know what was going on. Um, I think with the time in our country and how women were treated, thinking about, the woman as it couldn't be her. She couldn't be the brains behind it. And I think this goes back to like Pearl and um her killing sprees, right? Like she's a serial killer. That's what Pearl the movie shows, right? She was a serial killer. She was killing animals at a young age. I know we're talking about X, but it's a whole trilogy, y'all.
Oh yeah.
But to not know that something's happening, I think women are treated unfairly. They were not looked upon as intelligent as men traditionally. We all know we are. Hell yeah. So there's no way that she was ignorant enough to not know what was happening. Women know what's up. Instinctually, we know what's going on. So I don't buy her. I was scared. I didn't know. She's been trapped in it for a long time. Maybe she was trapped in how to do it, but she definitely knew what was going on.
I'd imagine they were certainly prosecuting her that way, that she was aware. And then probably as she got older in an effort to sort of, was just when she's sentenced to death, and then in the efforts to probably get her off death row, they probably tried to kind of, her defense probably tried to play her off as a little bit more of a victim, I guess, then rather, but I mean, like at the time when you're prosecuting, there's two different agendas there.
Yeah.
No, totally.
Do we think Faye's ledger is more chilling than the actual weapon?
Well, I mean, it's like, she's writing people's names down like it's a grocery list.
That's truly what it is. It was like broccoli, X, got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she didn't forget.
Right.
She was organized.
So there's a term amongst true crime, criminalists and true crime aficionados, the concept of the process killer and the product killer, right? Like the process killer is all about the ritual and the routines, but the product killer is about the product, which is, the dead body. So Faye and Ray, well, I just realized that Faye Ray, like King Kong, all right. But Faye and Ray, they were clearly like product killers, right?
Maybe I missed it, but what was the motivation for their killing? Was it purely for killing, or was there a greater purpose?
Money. It was to get these men that they erased from existence to bounce checks and get the cattle at these auctions. So they would everything would be in the names of these men who would essentially just disappear after the auctions, after the cattle was acquired. And they would get the cattle and they would use that cattle to generate income.
What the whole scheme basically was he couldn't go to the auction, so he hired the drifter. They'd go to the auction with a newly opened P.O. box and bank account. The drifter would purchase the cattle, livestock, with the bad checks. They'd get the cattle, flip it, and sell it off, and the check would bounce within that time frame. So Ray would just pocket all the money. I'm sure he promised these drifters a little something, something, but what they really got was a bullet to the back of the head and a shallow grave somewhere on the farm. Pretty well thought out.
Yeah. And the fact that she's sewing victims' clothing into like a quilt or something, then, illustrates that she's like obviously aware. I mean, she's, she is complicit in that,
It's giving serial killer trophy. That's what it's giving.
Totally.
Yeah.
Something very fetishistic about having, and I mean, the clothing off their backs after they got shot.
I mean, I guess it's Missouri. I mean, it's farmland. So I guess maybe their closest neighbor is not so close because, if it would be really interesting to talk to people who knew them, best.
Yeah.
As
their kids.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the really interesting aspect of this. The kids defend Faye to the teeth. I mean, it's their mom, right?
Okay.
Yeah. But they did say that because Ray did the shuffle in and out of jail and prison throughout their formative years too. And they said that every time he came out, they had to plan exactly how they would talk around him because the beatings would get worse and worse. So they were terrified of him. They did not like him. They absolutely hated the man and fully defend their mother. But, that brings up a question I'm thinking, like, well, with the kids, like, did they know? Or by the 80s, I mean, were they just kind of, well, we're of age, we're out of the house, and that's why and when the killings started? I wonder.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine I'd be out of there. What do you think, Peter?
I cheated. I just looked it up. It says that their children were all grown adults with their own families by the time the murders had started. So they're out of the house. So it's sort of like mom and dad have a new pastime because their kids are grown, because he doesn't start killing until his early 70s. And so at that point, what does he got to lose? I mean,
Which brings me back. I don't think this is the first time he has killed someone.
Yeah, I mean, that's
to start in your 70s. I don't know.
Yeah.
That seems a little sus to me.
Right.
Yeah, don't they say serial killers typically start in their 20s? I think they say the late 20s. Yeah, so...
Well, it takes 3 kills to be considered a serial killer, right? So...
And he is allegedly 8 under his belt, so...
Yeah, they just couldn't...
5 confirmed, 3 up in the air from the list.
Yeah, they're up there. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Jeez. So what a cheery story, everybody.
So, Peter, since we have you here, let us pick your brain. When you first read the script for X, what struck you the most about its tone compared to other horror films?
Well, yeah, I think in reading X, I think the tone, I don't know if I'm going to compare it to other horror films. I think I can even compare it to other films that Ty has written. Having worked with him, I thought that what was interesting was the sort of the contrast between what's happening brutally and then this enterprising, young group of people setting to do something very commercial. And I think in that, it's like there's a lot of sort of like they're having a lot of fun at the prospects of maybe, making a movie. I mean, I think, each of these characters have their own agenda of why they're there, and I think that, grounds the film. And I think it leads to, the film to being very like sort of relatable because it's sort of like, these are regular people, kind of like normal people doing something a little salacious, trying to make a porno. And the last thing that's on their mind is that this like, place that they're renting out as a location is harboring 2 violent and vicious killers. So yeah, when I read it, I was like really sort of impressed for Ty to have written such an interesting ensemble story. And then the best part is that in reading Pearl, not very long after having read X, and just seeing where that gives us more backstory about Pearl's character.
Yeah, dude, that's really awesome. Were there any moments or themes in X that stayed with you long after reading that script or watching the final product?
Well, I mean, I think, when you're making a movie, you go through a lot of thoughts because I think, what you set out to make and then, what evolves.
Yeah,
So I think, and this is, we're working with Ty West here, who's a writer director, has always been. And so he's got a very specific approach and thought process in the story that he's trying to tell and make. And so, yeah. One of the big things I think that I walk away from it is that, the unassuming elderly couple were disarmed, or ignore or overlook the elderly when they are the most knowledgeable because they've lived longer and generally
right.
have more life experience. And so I think we could all benefit from hearing their stories, and truly understanding, their POV.
Oh, absolutely.
Was there a point in the film when you thought this is going to stick with people?
Um, I mean, I think, yeah, certainly when you meet, Pearl in the sort of creepy way that she invites, Maxine inside the house to have some lemonade. But, yeah, I mean, I think I felt like the audience was already going to be so enraptured with what, um, you know, they were doing in terms of making this for a porno. I think that part of it, is sort of like, and I think, adult entertainment has only boomed, I think in this, where, sex workers are, now even more entrepreneurial because of technology and what they're able to control.
I think the scene that stuck with me the most as a viewer was definitely Pearl with Blue Oyster Cult playing in the background. I think that was an incredible scene. Great use of budget to get that song playing in the background because that was insane. Just Pearl.
And you killed the kid from Super Dark Times.
Yeah, I don't think you make a film set in this time period without having, at least one, and we were fortunate to have a couple of really strong, memorable cues from that, that late 70s there in order to bring the audience immediately, because I think music has that ability to time travel us.
100%. Like every time I'm getting into my car at 4:30 in the morning to, slog to my job, I think of X, and I think of that scene when I'm like, I'm neurotic, so I do this like walk around of my car to make sure like my headlights are working and my brake, like my taillights are on, and I'm like, oh, what if someone just walked up and stabbed me in the neck a bunch of times? I'm like, oh, it would be like that scene in X. So
Cue the music.
yeah. My God, just such an amazing film. But I have more questions about this. So, all right. So the Copeland story and X are about evil hiding in plain sight, right? So the tension that all builds up. Is this just do you think this is just like a primal fear that we all have? That are we all just a little skeptical of these idyllic places? I mean, look, the farm that Pearl and Howard lived on, I would want to live on there. I mean, murder aside, I mean, it is beautiful.
Well, but you have to understand, I think, from Pearl's perspective, I mean, she grew up on that farm, and she had aspirations to leave, in her, early days. And so, wanting, more to life than just living on the farm. And I think, and that's like, because of her love of movies in a way. And movies was sort of the way that she was able to see more of the world. I think, in her, I mean, like, television didn't exist, when she was a young person. So she had the movies, and like, she could see stories of dancing women and certainly when the projectionist sort of offers her an opportunity to travel abroad, that certainly gets, her very, excitable. And, yeah, so I think that, when that doesn't work out her way, and I guess her and Howard are just, decide, and this is like what he returns from the war, and this is what they have. And so, yeah, I mean, this is I think it's a tough time in America, for people to just, like, what choice do they have?
Poor Howard, man. That moment that he walks back into that house is like the ultimate, what's the absolute fuck moment of my life.
Yeah.
And it must have smelled lovely.
Yeah, I think spell aside, I mean, I'm sure he witnessed much worse coming back from the war. And you remember that Howard, well, his sister, you know, I mean, like they're an affluent family, and he chose to be with Pearl and marry Pearl. So that just speaks to who he is as a character and as a person. That, you know, like, yeah, he's super dedicated and made a choice to be. They're already married at that point, and so. You know, I think, you know, when you meet him for the first time in X, obviously we're just learning about him, but obviously getting to see Pearl and getting to know more about his backstory kind of just reinforces his truth.
So, bringing it back to X, do you think knowing the real case of the Copelands makes X more chilling, or does it work just as well without the context?
Yeah, I just think it just reinforces that, you know, I think, you know, like that this is believable, you know, that this could have happened to people because it did happen to some people, unfortunate people. I mean, not, you know, different reasons, motivations. I don't think these drifters were coming over there to try to make a stag film, but they certainly came there.
They were.
Yeah.
But it does bring me back to when they show the other victim of Pearl in the basement. You know, that could have easily been a drifter stopping at the farm if they needed help, or maybe he was hired farmhand. You know, that part's not really explained, but it's definitely shown that these folks making the dirty movie weren't the first victims. This has been an ongoing trend.
Right. Yes. I mean, like, yeah, I think Howard alludes to in his dialogue that says, you know, how much he's had to keep up, you know, with her appetite. And you know, clearly both, you know, sexually, you know, and then, you know, yeah, I think
Hard.
and then
Shit, I forgot about that.
Pearl, you know my heart.
Her bloodlust, you know. Yeah.
So knowing what we just all discussed today about the Copeland killings and just about, you know, the trilogy, do you think horror should lean into true crime more or keep a clear separation? Because, you know, we talking about the trilogy, we haven't even talked about Maxine, which I also absolutely fucking love. I just think Maxine is just such a fantastical conclusion to that trilogy. It's just, it is everything about that decade. And just to tie this back, because I'm digressing so much here, but like, do you think that when we get the dark true crime aspect, because X does feel like it could be a true crime biopic of a mass killing on a farm, and Pearl feels like a serial killer origin story, which it is, right? Like, do you think that horror should lean into true crime more or keep a clear separation?
No, I mean, I think good horror comes from an honest place, you know. So using true crime as inspiration, I think, you know, helps tell a story that's a little bit more grounded and less, you know, sort of like just you know, sort of less just fictional. I mean, I like my favorite, you know, horror movies are the ones that are truly grounded. Yet at the same time, I think that, you know, in horror movies, I mean, they're still movies, and so there's still sort of a form of, like, you know, entertainment at its base core, right? We're just telling these stories, and some stories are a little bit more like, you know, kind of you have to take a bigger leap of faith to kind of follow. And it's like, you know, is this believable or is it too fantastical? And like, you know, and I think there's space for obviously both. It does go back to just a matter of taste. You know, I think we are seeing horror, though, permeate a little bit more of the mainstream, which I think is really exciting times for horror, you know, filmmakers to get to tell our stories to bigger audiences who are more prepared. Yet at the same time, I think true crime has really grown, and our knowledge of true crime has, you know, well, the fan base for true crime is really out there. And so I think, you know, you have to kind of do your due diligence in both to acknowledge, like, well, what has come before us, you know, both in horror, in fiction and nonfiction, in telling your stories.
Yeah, no, absolutely. 100%. I think about, you know, both the fictional and the non-fictional, and just it's the sheer fact that there's people or a person who can orchestrate the essential erasure of a person from existence. It's this existential fear of mine that I think, I don't know, I guess I confront every time I read a true crime novel or watch a YouTube video about a string of killings or a serial killer. It's I don't know, that's so friggin' scary. Yeah. Thank you for making these phenomenal, terrifying films. I don't know. I appreciate it. There's
Well,
something about fear and horror I guess I'm an adrenaline junkie, maybe.
yeah. Well, thank you for that. Yeah. I mean, it takes a village to make these films, and just supporting the filmmakers who choose to take on these stories and tell them in such a way. Yeah. And I think, just to add a little bit more to what we were just talking about, I think that, like, on one hand, like, in making horror movies inspired by true crime, but not necessarily about that true crime, I think, it maybe, we uplift fictional characters rather than uplift these, real life villains, right? Because we shouldn't be celebrating and idolizing these actual serial killers, and I think, there's, some of these serial killers are now so famous because we continue to tell stories about them.
Well, let's lighten the mood a little bit.
It's time for one of our new favorite games where the blood is real, but the names have been changed to confuse the innocent.
All right.
This is Real or Real, the part of the show where we test your horror producer instincts to see if you can spot which murderous couples are actually true crime cases and which ones are made up or stolen from a movie. So you'll be the judge.
Yeah, we'll give you the setup. You tell us, is it real, like REEL, as in fictional film, or is it real, as in somebody definitely went to prison for it?
Bonus points if you pretend to struggle with morality while loving every second. Ready?
Yeah.
All right. And to our listeners at home, we encourage you to play along as well. All right. Round 1, the Tupperware Killers. A charming retired couple in Nebraska invited hitchhikers and transients into their home under the guise of Tupperware sales parties. All right. And then they killed them and labeled the remains with masking tape, meat, scraps, leftovers.
Like Sweeney Todd meets QVC. Real or real?
I would love it to be real, REAL, but I believe it's real, REEL.
You are right. Completely made up. But it sounds so Midwest that it hurts, right? Although we did base this one loosely on the vibes of the 1989 film Parents, starring Randy Quaid, who's a true crime story all in of itself. Yeah, Cannibal Suburbia it's always in style. Also one of his peak movies. But yeah, completely made up. Good job. All right.
It would have to be pretty big Tupperware to kind of fit a whole human body.
They got the big deal package.
And that movie, I think that movie was like set in like the 50s too. I love that. I got to revisit that. I have this they used to do, I think Lionsgate would release the series of DVDs under the Vestron video series where they'd like pull like the great big, cool big box titles from the video stores from the 80s, and Parents was definitely one of them. And man, I got to rewatch it. I am digressing. So round 2. All right. This one is called The Hypno Murders. So Alice Pressman, an elderly mother, uses hypnosis to force her adult son, John, to gouge out the eyes of strangers. Almost all of these killings were localized to movie theaters during the fall of 1987.
Real or real?
I would say I'm going to go the opposite. This sounds like that it could be an REEL, but I think this actually happens. But I think the motivations are probably like, that he pretended to be hypnotized and just did it anyway.
Believe it or not, this one is fiction. So this one I tried to do. Wait, hold on. Nope. Completely made up. I tried to do that in my best Jonathan Frakes voice. I'm totally fucked that up. But this one's actually from a movie called Anguish, starring Zelda Rubinstein. Tangina from Poltergeist. So Anguish is basically Inception for sickos. So it's, we wish it was real. I'd absolutely sign up for a horror cult led by Zelda Rubinstein. This house is clean. Tangine is a much better name, though.
I'd have to look up that movie.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's a good one. All right. We have time for one more. The final chapter. Or would this be a new beginning? Anyway, Friday the 13th nerdery aside. All right. The Sunset Strip Suitcase Killers. In 2012, a California couple stuffed their former roommate's body into a leopard print suitcase and left it behind a dumpster near a nightclub. Security footage later revealed them dragging it down Sunset Boulevard in heels and a fedora, the suitcase. Like it was a Wes Anderson short film, but with a little more blood and Weekend at Bernie's and worse choices. And so we ask you, Peter, real or real?
Well, it seems too far-fetched to be REAL, so I'm gonna guess it's real REEL, like from some movie but I don't think I'm good at this game.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
It is very real. REAL. Ryan and Jasmine Jenkins. It started as a reality TV romance, ended in body parts and a fugitive trail that ended with self-unaliving. Reality is always stranger and darker than we think. Peter, thank you so much for joining us. It's been amazing hearing about X from someone on the inside.
Yeah, you've given us a whole new perspective on X and its universe, and I really can't wait to rewatch through this lens and enjoy the films all over again.
We know you've been busy shaping the next wave of nightmares, so we'll let you get back to it.
But we'll keep doing what we do best, digging through the real-life horror that inspired it all.
How can folks find you, Peter?
Yeah.
At the movies. Yeah.
Nice.
Heck yeah. All right. Peter Polk, thank you again.
Thank
you, Peter. Yeah, man. Thank you for being here.
So, no, X isn't about the Copeland murders as far as we know, but the DNA is definitely in there. Secluded farmland, outsiders lured in, a couple bound together by marriage, and something a lot darker.
And it's that blend of beauty and rot. In X, Pearl, and Howard's farmhouse, it hides the resentment and longing. In Chillicothe, Missouri, where Ray and Faye Copeland were from, Ray and Faye hid greed and death. In both, the victims didn't see the danger until it was far too late.
And that's the horror that lasts when something ordinary hits something monstrous. And that's it for this episode from the Fear Archive.
If you survived the journey, subscribe, rate, and review before the shadows catch up to you.
Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Fear Archive Pod for the evidence we couldn't share here.
And don't wander alone. Explore the other dark corners of the Violet Hour Media and Realm Podcast Network.
Keep your lights low and your doors locked.
You've been listening to The Fear Archive, hosted by Amanda Kagawada and Michael Ryan Aesop, produced by Cassie Josepho, with original music by Umberto. This podcast is a production of Violet Hour Media.